The rain began just after midnight, soft and endless, drifting across the cliffs of Blackwater Cove like the ocean itself was breathing in its sleep. The people of the town were used to storms. Rain was part of life there. The fishermen still drank in the harbor taverns during thunder, and children learned to fall asleep to the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below the cliffs. But there was one thing nobody in Blackwater feared more than the storms themselves. Every single night, at exactly 12 o'clock, the old lighthouse standing on Widow's Point would suddenly come alive. Its pale beam would sweep slowly across the dark ocean, cutting through the fog like a giant searching eye. The problem was that the lighthouse keeper had been dead for nearly 10 years. His name was Elias Gray, and ever since the night he disappeared, nobody had dared to live inside the lighthouse again. Yet somehow the light never stopped returning. The older people in town still whispered about Elias carefully, almost fearfully, like saying his name too loudly might summon something terrible from beneath the sea. Elias had spent most of his life alone inside the narrow stone tower overlooking the cliffs. He was quiet, polite, and strangely distant, as though part of him already belonged to the ocean. Some people believed he loved the sea more than he loved human beings. Others claimed the sea loved him back. Then came the storm, the worst storm Blackwater Cove had ever seen. Waves rose higher than the harbor walls, windows shattered across town, and the entire coastline disappeared beneath fog and rain. By morning, Elias Gray was gone. Nobody was ever found. No footprints, no blood, nothing except his old lantern sitting near the edge of Widow's Point, still glowing despite the downpour around it. The very next night, the lighthouse turned itself on, and it had continued turning on every night since then. At first, the town tried to explain it logically. Some believed there was hidden electricity still running beneath the cliffs. Others blamed faulty systems or old machinery nobody understood. But those explanations quickly fell apart when people remembered the lighthouse was ancient. There were no generators, no automated controls, and no power source left inside the tower. The light should have died years ago. Yet every midnight the beam returned, sweeping slowly across the black ocean as though searching for something lost beneath the waves. Eventually, the townspeople stopped trying to understand it. They simply learned to live around it. Fishermen refused to sail after dark. Parents warned their children never to climb Widow's Point, and every once in a while, someone looking toward the lighthouse at midnight would swear they saw a figure standing behind the glass at the top of the tower, tall, motionless, holding a lantern in one hand, watching the sea below. Most people ignored the lighthouse the way people ignore old nightmares they can't escape. But Maura Vale couldn't stop thinking about it. Maura worked alone at the tiny radio station overlooking the harbor, taking overnight weather reports while the rest of Blackwater Cove slept. She suffered from terrible insomnia, the kind that made nights feel endless and heavy. Every evening, she sat beside the rain-covered windows of the station, listening to static crackling through old speakers, while the lighthouse beam drifted silently across the ocean outside. At first, she found it comforting. There was something strangely peaceful about knowing another lonely soul might still be awake out there in the darkness. But over time, she began noticing things that didn't make sense. The beam didn't move naturally. Sometimes it paused over certain parts of the water for several minutes at a time. Sometimes it flickered violently during calm weather, and sometimes, during the worst storms, it pointed directly toward the town itself like a warning. One night, the rain became so heavy, the entire harbor vanished behind gray fog. Mara sat half asleep beside the radio equipment when suddenly the speakers exploded with static. At first, she thought it was interference from the storm. Then she heard a voice buried beneath the crackling noise. Weak, distorted, barely human. Turn back. The words froze her completely. The voice sounded old and exhausted, like someone speaking through deep water. Below the water. Then the signal vanished. Mara stared at the radio in silence while thunder shook the building around her. The next morning, the harbor woke to something horrifying. A small fishing boat had drifted ashore completely empty. No crew, no signs of violence. Just seawater pooled across the floorboards and strange black barnacles covering the inside of the hull, like something from the bottom of the ocean had crawled aboard. After that, Mara became obsessed with the lighthouse. She spent weeks searching through old town records, newspaper archives, and forgotten journals stored inside the station's basement. Slowly, she discovered a pattern nobody else had noticed. Every disappearance in Blackwater Cove had happened during storms. Sailors vanished without explanation. Entire fishing crews disappeared overnight. Boats drifted back empty, exactly like the one from the harbor. And strangest of all, the disappearances stopped almost completely during the 30 years Elias Gray worked as lighthouse keeper. It was as though his presence alone had kept something away from the town, something waiting beneath the water. Eventually, curiosity overcame fear. Mara decided to climb Widow's Point herself. The townspeople begged her not to go. One old fisherman grabbed her wrist before she left and whispered something she would never forget. "If the light goes out," he said quietly, "don't let it come back." The climb up the cliffs felt endless beneath the rain and fog. Wind screamed across the rocks while the ocean crashed violently below her. And when Mara finally reached the lighthouse, she noticed something impossible immediately. The beam above was already turning slowly through the fog, even though the heavy iron doors were chained shut from the outside. Her hands shook as she broke the chain and stepped inside. The air inside the lighthouse felt wrong, cold, wet, ancient. The spiral staircase creaked beneath her feet, while thunder rattled the tower walls around her. The higher she climbed, the colder the air became. Then she heard footsteps somewhere above her. Slow, dragging footsteps were circling the lantern room at the top. Mara reached the final staircase at exactly midnight. The lighthouse beam suddenly stopped moving the moment she stepped inside, and standing beside the enormous glass windows was Elias Gray, or something pretending to be him. His skin looked pale gray beneath the moonlight, pouring through the fog. Seawater dripped endlessly from his coat onto the floor beneath him. His eyes were completely black, hollow, empty. But somehow the most terrifying thing about him wasn't his appearance. It was the exhaustion on his face, like he had been standing there for centuries. Slowly, Elias raised one trembling hand and pointed toward the ocean below. Mara stepped closer to the glass and finally saw what was moving beneath the waves. Shapes. Massive, dark shapes circling beneath the cliffs. Dozens of them, watching the shore, waiting in the darkness below the waterline. Then, Elias finally spoke. His voice sounded deep and broken, like wood creaking underwater. "They follow the dark." The lighthouse flickered violently. Instantly, the creatures below surged closer to shore. Mara watched enormous shapes twisting beneath the waves, far too large and unnatural to be human. Panic flooded through her chest. "What are they?" she whispered. Elias never looked away from the sea. "Hungry," he answered softly. The lighthouse dimmed again. The ocean below exploded with movement. Something enormous shifted beneath the cliffs, rising slowly toward the surface. Mara stumbled backward in terror as Elias turned toward her one final time. And suddenly she understood the horrifying truth. The lighthouse had never been guiding ships. It had been keeping those things away from Blackwater Cove. Elias Gray had never truly left because he couldn't leave. He had stayed behind after death itself to hold the light against whatever lived beneath the ocean. The beam suddenly surged back to full brightness, flooding the coastline with pale white light. Instantly, the creatures retreated beneath the waves again. Elias slowly stepped backward into the darkness behind the lantern room, his body fading like mist. Before disappearing completely, he whispered one final warning. "When the light dies, run." The next morning, Mara returned to town pale and silent. She never told anyone what she saw inside the lighthouse. But from that night onward, the people of Blackwater Cove noticed something strange. Every evening, just before midnight, Mara would quietly climb Widow's Point alone, carrying a lantern in her hand. And every night, when the lighthouse beam swept once more across the ocean, Some people swore they could see two figures standing behind the glass at the top of the tower instead of one.